Hi, welcome back. I'm Connie from Let's Go Crafting. Today we're going to make a little coin purse. You will need the pattern, which will be linked underneath the YouTube video. You will need both paper scissors and fabric scissors. You will need 2 pieces of fabric. Anything will work. You can use sheets, you can use pillowcases, t-shirt material, although harder to sew with, will also work. You'll need a button, a little bit of Velcro, and then depending upon if you're going to sew by hand or sew on the sewing machine, you might need a needle and thread. All right, let's start. I'll meet you at the craft table. Here we are at the craft table. This is your pattern. You're going to use your paper scissors for the paper. If you use your fabric scissors on paper, they will get dull much quicker. If you notice on your pattern, there's several different things. This says a fold line, so that's not a cutting line, that's a fold line. And the same with this one as well. This is where we're going to put 1/2 of our Velcro. So that's why it says Velcro placement. When I cut, I try always to cut with my hand in a comfortable position. If I need to turn my hand to cut, that makes it so it's uncomfortable. What I really want to do is I want to use the hand that's not cutting to move the paper so that my cutting hand is always in a comfortable position. So in this case, my right hand cuts and my left hand moves the paper. If you're left-handed, your left hand will be cutting and your right hand will be doing the moving of the paper. So now we have our pattern. These fold lines are, this line is right here, and this line, that fold line, is right here. It's where we fold the little coin purse over. This is where we put our Velcro, and your Velcro will go on the outside of your coin purse. Now we're going to cut. I'm going to put my fabric together. I'm going to line up the edges. And I'm going to set my pattern piece on there. I tend to try and get it close to one or the other side just to save more fabric so that I can use it for something else. I'm going to pin my pattern to my fabric. When we pin, it's always good to make sure that your pin is on the inside of your pattern. You're going to be cutting outside of the pattern line. So if your pin is sticking out like that, you won't be able to cut. It will be too hard. And it will ruin your scissors. So you're going to put your pin through your pattern paper, through both pieces of fabric, and back out again. Something this small really doesn't require a whole lot of pins. So I'm only going to put 4 pins in here. Once you've pinned your pattern to your fabric, then it's time to cut. You just want to cut on the outside of your pattern. You can see that I'm sort of also cutting my paper. That's not something you want to do. You want to try and cut the fabric and not the paper. So I'm doing much better later on. So So I'm going to keep going, and again I'm making sure that my cutting hand is comfortable and my non-dominant hand, my other hand, is the one that's actually moving the fabric and the pattern. Okay, now I'm going to move these to the side. So let's take our pins out. Okay, so this is the point where we need to decide which fabric we're going to use for the outside of our coin purse and which side we're going to use for the inside. I think I'm going to choose this one. So since this is going to be the outside, I'm going to separate my Velcro, and I'm going to use 1/2 of it down here. And this corresponds to, if you're looking at your coin purse, to the bottom here. So we know that our Velcro needs to go right in the middle. You know, if we lay our pattern on our fabric, there's our Velcro. I can just keep my hand steady and put my Velcro right there. And now I'm going to put just a pin so it stays in place while I go to the machine. Now, if you don't have a machine and you're sewing by hand, let's talk about that right now. I would take my thread and I would measure out a piece the appropriate length for myself. And how I do that is I take the end of the thread, I hold it between my thumb and my index finger, and I just stretch my arm out and I bring the spool over to my shoulder. And that is where I cut. That will make it the perfect length for me. Now, I happen to have a piece of thread that I used from a different project that I'm gonna use for this project as well. Okay, so what we do with our thread is I have a needle. Any needle basically works fine. It just has to be sharp on the bottom, and it has to have a hole in the needle. That's called the eye of the needle, large enough for your thread to go through. So I'm going to thread my needle. I'm putting my thread through the eye of the needle like that. And now I'm going to pull my thread and get my ends even. So here's the two ends of your thread, and they're even. And I'm going to grab them between my thumb and my index finger. I'm going to wrap around my index finger and cross over my thread ends. And if you can see, that sort of looks like an X. The next thing you do is you just roll the thread right off your finger and then pull it down. And there's your knot right there, pretty much at the end of your thread. And then you just take your needle and you pull. For putting on Velcro, I like to use the running stitch. I'm going to demonstrate that right now. The running stitch is kind of like running along. So it's a lope, lope, lope. So running stitches have a little gap in between the stitches. So to do a running stitch, you come up from the back of your fabric. You come over to the left, maybe 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little more, and then you put your needle back down in your fabric and you pull. And then you come up again to the left, about 1/8 of an inch away from your last stitch, and you pull, and then you go back down, and you just keep going up and down until you're finished with your seam. So now let's pretend that I'm finished with my seam, or I'm finished sewing my Velcro on. I'm going to come to the back of my work, and I'm going to take a tiny little stitch right near where my thread came out. I'm going to try not to have it show on the front. I only want to go through the back piece of fabric. And then I'm going to go through that same little part again. And now I will have a little loop, okay? Just like that. But you don't want it to be tangled. You want it just to be not tangled. So then you come to the front of the loop and you go through one time, and then you go through again 2 times, and then you just pull it tight. And then there's your knot. You push it to your fabric and you're done. Now if you were to cut your thread right near the knot, eventually your knot will come undone. So I stick my needle right next to my knot and I slide it down my fabric a little ways, making sure it's not on the outside. And then I pull tight. And then I would cut it off right there. Okay, so I will meet you at the sewing machine. I'm gonna sew this on the sewing machine. Here we are at the sewing machine. We're gonna place our fabric and our Velcro underneath the presser foot, and we're gonna lower our presser foot. I'm taking my pin out. I'm gonna sew forward just to the end of my Velcro, and now I'm going to go backwards, and now I'm done. This side of my Velcro is sewn on, so I'm going to lift my presser foot, pull my fabric off the sewing machine, and cut my thread. And now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. The Velcro really only needs to be sewn on the ends. So I'm going to sew this side. And I'm going to take it off. Now if you notice, I've got a whole bunch of thread hanging off of my coin purse. I like to trim my threads as I go so I don't have a bunch of spare threads hanging all over the place that I have to remember to cut later. So I just hold them up and I cut them off. So here we go. And I have this spare little thread that I'm not sure what happened. Now I'm going to turn my fabric over. And I'm going to cut the threads from the back of the fabric as well. Okay, now we're going to put our coin purse together. I'll meet you at the end of the table. All right, so now I have the outside of my coin purse that has my Velcro attached. I have the lining of my coin purse, and we're going to look at our fabrics. So when we sew something together, we want to sew it right sides together. But what really does that mean, right? The right side of the fabric is typically the more vibrant side, and it's the side that you're going to see when your project is finished. The other side is called the wrong side of the fabric, and that will be the inside. So we're going to turn this fabric over on top of this one, and that means that they are right sides together because the right sides of the fabrics are touching each other. And now we're going to pin these together because we're going to sew them together. We want to pin them so that the edges are even. You don't want your fabrics to look like that. You want your fabrics to be even. And when we pin, we stick our pin close to the edge of our fabric, and then we kind of rotate it and push it back through our fabric. And the rule of thumb for pinning is that you put a pin a hand width apart. So your pin should be about a hand width apart. And I'm going to make my fabrics behave. Now, what pins do is they hold your fabric together. They make your fabric behave. If I were to sew on a sewing machine and I had these two fabrics and there were no pins, my fabric would have a tendency to slide or slip apart. So it would no longer be together. They would be separate, and my coin purse would not look, it wouldn't work as well, and it wouldn't look as nice. I just want to put in enough so it's all going to hold together as I sew. Get my point together. You notice some of my pins are bent, but they still work, so I still use them. So now our coin purse is pinned. We have to leave an opening where we can turn our coin purse right side out. I'm going to choose to leave my opening on a straight side. This is a long straight side, and that makes it easier once we have it right side out and we then have to sew this closed. It's so much easier and looks so much better than if you have to try and go around a corner. So this is the spot I'm going to leave open. Now, if I'm sewing this is for me, and I started here and I sewed all the way around, I would most likely forget to stop here and leave this part open. So I always give myself a visual cue. I put 2 pins to tell me to stop. Something's different. All right, let's go to the sewing machine. Now we're at the sewing machine. We're gonna sew our coin purse with a seam allowance of 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch is approximately, if you lay the side of your presser foot on the side of your fabric, you'll be sewing at 1/4 inch. I don't sew over my pins. I take them out as I go along. Now, if you are sewing this by hand, you already have a knot at the end of your string, so you can just start sewing. Since I am on the sewing machine, I am going to have to secure these threads to make sure that they don't pull out. To do that, I sew forward a couple of stitches, then I use my back stitch or my reverse button, and I go backwards a couple of stitches, and then I just keep going. I go forwards. When I come to a corner, I put my needle into my fabric, and I lift my presser foot, and then I rotate my fabric. I leave the needle in so that my fabric doesn't pull off my sewing machine. And then I'll put my presser foot down. Now you can see that I am not at the edge of my fabric. So I will, if I continue to sew in this way, I will not be sewing 1/4 inch. I want to be sewing at 1/4 inch. So I'm going to lift my presser foot, rotate my fabric back to the starting position, and now I'm going to slowly come forward. For me, I can't step on my presser foot or my foot pedal and just go 1 stitch. So I come over to the other side of my sewing machine, and there's a knob right here. This knob controls your needle. So if you are moving your knob, you're also moving your needle, and it will sew. So I'm going to show you how that works. Right here. So if you're looking at the needle, watch the needle. See how it's coming up and then it goes forward and it comes down again. I just took 1 stitch. Now I'm going to check to see if I am in the right spot to sew. And yeah, I'm pretty good. Now if I needed to, if I wasn't in the right spot, I would just lift my presser foot again, rotate back, use my little knob over there, take another stitch, and then check it again. And then we're just gonna finish sewing this. So when I come to a pin, I stop sewing and I take my pin out. The reason I do this is there are a couple things that can happen if you sew over your pins. One is nothing at all will happen, and that's the best case scenario. The next thing that could happen is possibly your pin will break or the needle on your machine will break. And that's also okay because you would just replace, either the needle on the machine or you would replace the pin. The last thing that can happen, and it happens very rarely, is that neither the pin nor the needle will break and then everything gets pushed up into your sewing machine. And that's not something I can fix. So then my sewing machine would have to go to the repair shop, and I don't want to do that. So I never sew over my pins. Very, very rarely do I sew over my pins. So now I'm going to come to my next corner, and I'm going to make sure my needle is in. I'm going to lift my presser foot and rotate. Rats, I am not at the right place. So I'm going to come back. And that actually looked like 2 stitches. So I'm going to use my knob and I'm going to hand sew with the sewing machine for 2 stitches. And I'm going to rotate back, and there I'm at the right spot. And I'm going to continue sewing. I'm going to sew all the way around. I'm going to pivot at this corner. I'm going to pivot at this corner. So I'm going to sew here, pivot, and sew back down here. I'm going to pivot here, and then I'm going to back stitch here. So I will see you when I'm done sewing all the way to here. Okay, here I am at the end of my seam. This is where I started, this is my opening, and this is where I ended. So now I'm going to make sure that my seam doesn't pull out. So I'm going to do a few little reverse stitches, and I'm going to come back forward. And now I'm going to take my coin purse off of my sewing machine. Lift my presser foot, pull the threads. Now this is close enough to the edge that I can use the cutter on the side of my machine. And that did just fine. And I'm also going to cut the ones at the beginning so that I don't have to worry about them later. Now we're going to turn our, first what we're going to do is something called trimming our corners. If we turn this right side out right now, we're going to have a lot of bulk here at the tip and on all the corners. And bulk is just extra fabric. We don't want the extra fabric. If we have extra fabric, you won't get a nice crisp corner when you turn it. So to trim your corners, you're going to use your fabric scissors. And you are going to trim a little triangle off. So you're going to cut diagonally, and you're being careful not to cut your threads at all. So I'm going to cut mine just like that. Okay? I'm going to come over here. I'm going to cut this corner just like that so that it's away from the seam, but I've cut most of the fabric off. Now this one looks a little strange, right? Because it's not a 90-degree angle. It comes up here and then it just turns slightly. But you can still cut that one off. Kind of like that. And this point one, we just cut the very tip of our pouch off, making sure that we don't cut through our threads. Now if we were to cut through our threads, we would then have a hole in our pouch. We would just want to put it back on the sewing machine or use our thread and needle and re-sew that area again to make sure that we don't have a hole. And then I'm going to cut this last one. So now you can see I have all my little corners cut off. And I'm going to put all those little things in the trash to keep my area nice and neat. The next step is we're going to turn our pouch right side out. I'm going to open it up like that. And I'm going to reach all the way to the tip and push it out the hole. And I'm going to do that the same with these corners. I'm just kind of going to turn it right side out, almost like a pair of socks. And now we kind of have something that doesn't look like a pouch at all. It's all rumpled up. So we just have to play with it a little bit and push out all our corners. Now I use my finger. Sometimes I use the end of my pencil. Sometimes I use this. This came in the bag of stuffing. You can also use chopsticks, anything that will get up into your corners and push them out. Okay? And I'm just running the edge of the stick against my seams to make sure they're nice and crisp. And over here I can tell my corner is not out, so I'm pushing it out. And I'm going to come down this seam. And I'm going to push out this corner. Ooh, that came out a lot. And now I'm going to push out this corner. There we go. So now our pouch is almost done. Now we need to iron. So I will meet you over at the ironing board. Now we're at the ironing board and we're going to iron. Now our iron gets very hot. So here are the parts of the iron. So this is your faceplate. This is the part that gets super hot. You never want to touch that part. The only part on an iron that we touch is the handle. So you're going to control your iron with the handle. And every time you're done ironing, you're going to stand it on its foot. And the iron's foot is right here. So let's iron. When we iron something that has Velcro, we want to be very careful. The Velcro will actually melt onto your iron. So as you're ironing, well, first let me show you. On the edge that we didn't sew, we want to tuck that in. So if you leave it out like this, it gets frayed, but we want to tuck that in so that when we're done, it just looks like another seam. So now we're going to iron. You put your iron down on your project, but you're not going to put it on the Velcro. And you're just really going to give it a nice press on all your seams. And that makes it look much nicer. Okay? And now we really are almost done. So here we are back at the sewing machine. And remember, I decided that this was going to be the inside of my coin purse. And this is the outside of my coin purse. So I'm going to turn it over so that the inside is looking at me. And I'm just going to fold it up so that the corner of my coin purse is matching the corner just slightly below where your coin purse goes from straight to slanted up to the point. So it's going to look like that. Okay, and we're going to put 2 pins. We're going to put 1 pin on this side, and we're going to put 1 pin on this side. And now we're going to sew. We are going to sew up the edge on this side and then up the edge on that side. So I'm going to put it onto the sewing machine. Now remember when we sewed our pouch together, we had our presser foot on the very edge of the fabric. This time we're going to move our fabric so that we're sewing closer to the edge and the fabric is lined up about halfway from the edge of the presser foot to the middle. And we're just going to sew. Now if you're using your needle and thread, you don't have to do any reverse stitches. If your pouch is getting stuck and it won't move forward, grab the ends of your threads and gently pull it along. And now you can hear it's not working at all. I'm just going to put my hand on the knob and give it a little help. So your machine might need help once in a while, just like you do. And so we help by pushing our fabric along or by helping it by turning the knob. So here I am at the end of this seam. I'm going to do another back stitch. And there, one part of my pouch is sewn. I'm going to trim my threads. And I'll be right back after I've sewn this side. Here we are. Both sides of our pouch are sewn. Looks pretty cool to me. It works. See, that's where we can put our stuff. The next part, we're going to put the other side of elastic here. It will attach right there. We're going to do it the exact same way we did the first one. So I'm going to put it onto the sewing machine. Now, if you're doing it by hand, you would just do it by hand. It's the same process, different way. And you just sew across one end of the elastic, forwards and then backwards. Take it off. And I'm going to sew the other part. And there we are, all done. Now on to trimming my threads. I really don't like to have extra threads hanging out everywhere, so I really take time to cut my threads nice and close. That's the front of my work is now nice and neat and tidy. And now the back of my work. All right, so the last step now is going to be putting a button on your pouch. I chose a purple button. You can choose any button you want. It just adds a little bit of decoration. You don't actually need it there. I have the thread from before, and I'm going to knot it just like we did before, where it comes over in an X. You wrap it around your finger, you cross the end so it looks like an X, and then you just roll it right off the end of your finger and pull tight. This end I'm going to want to cut because I am going to see it a little. So I'm cutting it about like that. Now I can decide to sew this button on so that my holes are horizontal. I can do them on the diagonal. I can do them vertically. I can do them any way I want. I think I'm going to do mine horizontally. So I'm going to come to the back of my fabric and I'm just going to stick my needle in there and I'm going to try and find the hole. And it's called fishing because you're actually fishing for the hole. There we go. It comes right up. Be careful not to poke yourself. And then you go down into the other buttonhole. Okay, and you pull it tight. And now I'm going to want to do it one more time. So I come to the back. I can see where my knot is. That's probably close to where the hole in the button is. So I try and stick my needle there. And I am. It came through. Now if it didn't, if it came up like over here or somewhere else, you just pull it out, stick it back in, and you kind of fish around until you find that hole. And that's why it's called fishing. You're fishing around to see if you can find the hole. And then you come back down. And now we make our knot the same way. I'm actually, instead of taking a little bit of fabric, I'm actually just going to go under my black thread from the stitches on the button. And I'm going to come and do it one more time. Velcro seems to be holding on to my threads a little bit. I'm going to loosen them up, and I'm going to go through the loop once and twice, and then I'm going to pull my knot so that it looks nice, and you might have to pull your threads a little to make sure everything's snugged and tight. Velcro has a habit of hanging on to them. I can guarantee you it's not going to come out. And then you just bury your thread just like before, where you stick your needle in and then have it come out somewhere else. Okay? Boy, my threads are giving me a lot of trouble this time. There we go. All nice and tidy. And then I cut it off. And now, there's our coin purse.